Good evening and welcome. We are so grateful you're here. My name is Chris Ballard. I work for Memorial Park Conservancy. I am our Chief Operating Officer, and on behalf of myself and our entire team at the Conservancy, we're so thankful for your attendance. We know your time is valuable, and we appreciate you being here. Your input is valuable. It makes us in Memorial Park better. There are two gentlemen that you're going to hear from tonight, and then we will do questions at the end. First, you'll hear from Thomas Woltz, Senior Principal and Owner of Nelson Bird Woltz, and then also Jason Holt. So Jason is an attorney. He currently lives in New Jersey. Jason is a descendant of one of the soldiers of the 24th and has been so instrumental in the U.S. Army overturning the convictions. And so we'll hear from Jason tonight. Is an incredibly powerful connection to this project. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Thomas. And yes, thanks, Thomas.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to be back here, and I'm so grateful to all of you giving up your evenings at home to come and share your thoughts about the Memorial Groves portion of the project. We began 12 years ago with 1 year of these listening sessions. So this has been a long-time commitment, as Chris mentioned, and we are so honored to continue to be engaged for the implementation of the creative ideas that came through the master plan. I wanted to just quickly review a little bit about the 2015 master plan. That was when it was voted on by City Council, unanimous approval for the master plan. But the first year of engagement was 2 years prior to this, when we did the year of listening sessions, moving throughout districts around the center of Houston. And then 1 year of design. During that year of listening sessions, for those of you who attended those, you'll recall we brought a lot of history forward. Our landscape architecture firm is somewhat unique in that we have on staff conservation biologists, and some have been PhDs in restoration ecology. So we care very deeply about the ecosystems in which we work. And parallel to that, we have cultural landscape historians who, while we're looking at the ecological health of a long-term resilient future for these sites that are mostly public landscapes, we're also looking deeply at the history of the site and who came before us. And we really try to start in each project with time immemorial, which in the United States and Canada is indigenous communities. So we try to build a timeline that begins with indigenous communities all the way through the different stages. And in that process, we find the unique stories that belong to every piece of land that we work with. At this point, 25 years of doing this, I don't really know how to begin a landscape without looking carefully at its ecologies and its culture. When you do that, you find the authentic stories that belong uniquely to that site. And Memorial Park is a remarkable example of that. So I want to frame it in the master plan work by reminding you first of this image that a lot of you saw, this size image. This is the greensward plan by Olmsted and Vox for Central Park at scale with Memorial Park, overlain twice to see that we have a park that is double the size of Central Park. And as some of the supporters have said, and we want it double as good as Central Park, which is very, very sweet and comforting support. The reason that our firm was engaged was from 2010 to 2014, Houston suffered devastating drought. And as those of you who love public space and love nature, you watched as thousands and thousands of trees died in this horrible experience, ecological disaster for the park. What it did was it created an opportunity to meet the 21st century needs of the city by adaptive restoration ecology, by moving amenities that had ended up dropped around the park. For example, ball fields and parking lots and outdoor lighting and things that were located to the southern half have been moved to the north, where they can share maintenance facilities, management, all of that, as we move ball fields and sports locations to the north. And that's freeing up a future project, which is the restoration of the southern half of the park. One of the projects we're looking at in the next year or two is the Southern Arc, which will be walks that allow you to experience this essentially undisturbed, massive piece. I mean, it's about 700 acres south of Memorial Drive. So we have this giant ecological repository that is a neighbor to the Houston Arboretum and Nature Center. So a consistent land use across this whole bottom half of this land mass. This is a heartbreaking aerial where you see the scale of loss of the dead trees from the drought. I have to make a massive shout out to the Memorial Park Conservancy that Shelley Arnold was hired, I think, the week we were brought onto this project. So we all kind of started this together, and the Conservancy was quite small then, and it has grown carefully and wisely in measure to the maintenance of the new projects that are coming on each step of the way. So this is an extraordinary commitment of an organization to grow in lockstep with the new amenities that are being brought on. This is the result of a lack of maintenance and care. I would say that this was a long neglected piece of land that unfortunately could not withstand the brutality of the drought. Another heartbreaking image that takes us back 15 years ago. The process, this is just a slide to remind us, these are all the zip codes that attended our public meetings. We were trying to make the point to the city of Houston that this is the park at the heart of the city of Houston. It's for all Houstonians. It is intentionally and by design an extremely inclusive landscape where all are welcome. And it offers something really for everyone, whether it's recreation, immersion in nature, access to the bayou, some world-class sports fields, and even golf. I am not a golfer, but I understand it's an outstanding course. So really there is something for absolutely everyone in this park. These were the 5 words that came out of that public process that I would say to this day are guiding our thinking, reconnecting the land, waterways, trails, people, and memories. Consolidate compatible uses together in appropriate areas. This is why removing bright lights and parking lots and ball fields from the south and getting them to the north so that we could restore that southern half and consolidate maintenance to the north. Ideas like that. Restore the ecology of the park and our connection to it. I have a slide that talks about those ecosystems that were revealed through analysis of the soils and the plant communities that were there. We worked with Berg Oliver over a decade ago to do the surveys of the soils and understand what was healthy and what was not in this landscape. So it wasn't like we think this, we actually had, I can't remember, I think 40 scientists working on this over a year doing analysis of this landscape. Enhance the overall park experience and its amenities. I hope if any of you have enjoyed the Eastern Glade or the Scramble or the tunnels or any of the sports ball facilities to the north, I hope you feel that enhancements have been made for all the people of Houston. And then tend. This is our commitment really to the past and the future, tending the land and our cultural history and maintain the balance through responsible management. That goes to my point, and really a huge compliment to the Memorial Park Conservancy for building a knowledgeable staff. They're not hiring out maintenance. They are building an internal staff that knows these plant beds, knows these meadows, prairies, and forests. They see when something is going wrong, and they can address those issues. This is just a slide we pulled from the master plan process where we noticed how Memorial Park had been chopped up in a lot of pieces with a lot of roads put through it over time. Memorial Drive being a big one, and the urge from the public to find ways to bridge over these barriers and reconnect people. So the Land Bridge and Prairie project is one of the ones that did exactly that. This is an important slide also, looking at the existing conditions when we began the project on the left, and then through soil studies and plant community analysis with Berg Oliver, understanding these typologies: riparian forest, riparian edge and barranco forest, pine hardwood forest, pine hardwood savanna, and native prairie. These are sort of the ancient, authentic Texas ecologies that have shaped this place for thousands of years before we introduced a lot of change, before invasive plants were introduced, before a lot of the development pressures occurred in Houston. So we thought, drought will come again to Houston, and floods will come again to Houston. So we need to invest in these ancient ecosystems and rebuilding these ancient ecologies into the future. So that's why the Land Bridge and Prairie project is wet and dry prairie, because it can hold a storm the size of Hurricane Harvey, but it's planted with wet and dry prairie native seeds. And again, the Conservancy did extraordinary work collecting seeds, growing the native seeds, mulching the trees that had died, building their own soil, and even inoculating that soil with mycorrhizal fungi from the Katy Prairie to build the healthiest soil, so when the seeds were planted in that soil, they were home. They could survive and thrive. So that's another extraordinary example of the Conservancy's stewardship here. So this map helped guide us in what should these places become as we rebuild Memorial Park. When I say what should these places become, I mean what ecosystems should we be restoring toward, while still accommodating trails and play and all of these other necessary features. Because of tonight's conversation being that we're finally at this portion of the park, the Memorial Groves concept, I wanted to show you this image on the left is an aerial of Memorial Park with the plan of Camp Logan laid over it. For any of you who are new to this process, I guess I should step back and say Memorial Park is here because some citizens got together and said, the training camp for World War I soldiers, called Camp Logan, that occupied even more than the footprint of Memorial Park, that training camp at the end of war was acquired by the Hogg family, and they negotiated a deal with the city for the city to buy it over time to create a public park with the request that it be a memorial to the soldiers who were trained and died, who trained at Camp Logan. So from its very beginning, this was a park about remembering the sacrifice of the many who served and many who gave their lives for freedom. We knew in the master plan some place needed to be set aside for people to go to remember, to learn the stories of sacrifice, of patriotism, of injustice, to find a place to tell the truth around the stories of war and Houston's particular role in building this large camp and training facility. Where should it go? Where should it, and is it a giant statue? Is it a big star? Is it a big object? And we all thought, no, it should be in an authentic place where there are ruins or remains of the camp. And as I said way back then, it should be in a place where you can stand and hold hands with history, a place that's authentic to this story. So this is where all the ball fields were located to the south. There's Memorial Drive cutting through those regiments. Each of these rectangles is a regiment where they were housed. This is the Camp Logan neighborhood. This was actually traded and then got developed in houses. So that's gone. This portion up here is under the highway. So that's gone. And when I say gone, I mean archaeological traces, foundations, ditches, the things that were built. This area right along the railroad track, as we started to look closer and more recently beginning this project we have, has a significant number, they're very modest, but a significant number of actual artifacts from the construction of Camp Logan. So there's not another place something like this could go. Now, why not a big object? Well, this is a very big story, and one of the many tragic aspects of World War I was the scale of death and loss. It was a giant, giant effort, and the world was shaken by this, and we lost a generation of people. So scale became a word. How do you evoke the scale of this loss? How do you connect people to the idea of this sacrifice? We're not here to make everybody sad. We've got a lot of joyful parts of the park, but we want to bring you to this reality of history. Camp Logan, as it was built, the 3rd Battalion of the 24th on August 23rd, that we're going to hear about, into World War I next, into the camp being decommissioned, the transformation to the park, the history of I'm a Hog and the reverter clause, and then the beginning of Memorial Park Conservancy, and next, and really bringing us up to this question now that's, I think, essential to the memorial groves, is this question of restoration of justice. Telling the truth and telling history is an essential part of what the land holds, and I think it's been our job to discover that and find ways to beautifully communicate that in an honest way for the long, long future. Next. So here I'll turn it over to Mr. Holt, who will speak to us. Thank you.
Ten Hunt, Corporal Charles Baltimore, Private Ira B. Davis, PFC William Breckenridge, Corporal Larnon J. Brown, Private James Divins, PFC Carlos Snodgrass, Corporal Jesse Moore, Corporal James Wheatley, Private Pat McWhorter, Sergeant William C. Nesbitt, PFC Thomas Coleman Hawkins, Private Risley W. Young, Private Frank Johnson. I call those 13 names because those are the first 13 executed members of the 24th Infantry, executed without an appeal, executed under the cover of darkness, executed without counsel. I happen to be the nephew of that gentleman standing right there, Private First Class Thomas C. Hawkins, who was born in January of 1893, and enlisted in the military in 1914 as a result of his brother asking him to join and come join with me. He was in the 10th Cavalry on his way to the Philippine Islands. I don't know what it was like in 1917, and I don't know what it was like to be a person of color in 1917 in Houston, Texas. But I think history will tell us to some degree what that was like. I'm going to take a little creative liberty. I'm going to read you a poem from Thomas Coleman Hawkins. As I look back and wonder, back in my youthful days, I think of my dear old mother, how she bows down with me to pray, how she asked the Lord for his blessing, that from labor I may go to rest, and not to dwell among the demons, but in heaven with the blessed. But whilst I am in this distant land and not yet numbered among the dead, I pray the Lord will extend his hand and bless me with the blessings as she said. If I can once more see her in the land of the living, not the dead, to tell her the Lord has answered her prayer and the debt I owed has been paid. Although I am a soldier under the stars and stripes, but for me to reap eternal life, I'm a soldier under Christ. This was written from the theater of war in 1915 from the Philippine Islands. Sadly, he never got to see his mother again in this world. But what I will tell you is it's my family's hope, actually it's our prayer, that what takes place in Memorial Park, in Memorial Grove, is a calling, a place where the souls of these men can find peace, a place where their souls can come and go to rest. There's so many things that are welling up in me at this moment, and I'm certainly grateful for the opportunity to be able to speak to you. I'm also grateful to the elected officials for the city of Houston who have adopted resolutions which are tantamount to atonement. But for us, the family, and other families, we welcome a project like this. We think a project like this is long overdue. So in 1924, when the concept of a memorial park for soldiers was introduced, I'm sure that it did not take into consideration the men of the 24th. I'm assuming that folks in this audience are familiar with what happened on August 23rd in 1917. So I'm not going to reiterate that. But what I will say, for those of you who perhaps have some concern in terms of acknowledging the men of the 24th and putting into perspective what took place on August 23rd, I will tell you, in his case and in the case of many others, as acknowledged by the Army, by setting aside their convictions, that the guilt that was associated with them was inappropriately associated with them. And to that extent, I'll read one more letter, which it's better to hear from someone else rather than it be recreated. And this was a letter from him on December 11th of 1917, just before he was taken out to be executed. Dear Mother and Father, when this letter reaches you, I will be beyond the veil of sorrow. I will be in heaven with the angels. Mother, don't worry over your son, because it is heaven's gain. Look not upon my body as one that must fill a watery grave, but one that is asleep in Jesus. I fear not death. Did not Jesus ask death, where art thy sting? Don't regret my seat in heaven by mourning over me. I now can imagine seeing my dear grandfather and grandmother and the dear girl, Miss Bessie Henderson, that I once loved in this life, standing at the river of Jordan, beckoning to me to come. And oh, Mother, should they be sensitive of my coming, don't you think they are anxious for tomorrow morning to come, when I will come unto them? I'm sentenced to be hanged for the trouble that happened in Houston, Texas. Although I am not guilty, of the crime that I am accused of. But Mother, it is God's will that I go now and in this way. And Mother, I'm going to look for you and the family. I will meet you at the river. Come unto me, all ye that are heavy laden, and I will give thee rest. Bless his holy name. This is the happiest day I met with since Jesus spoke peace to my soul in Brookstone Church. From my promise to God, I have strayed away, but I am with him now. Just imagine getting that letter as a parent. Because his parents didn't know he was executed, and at the point that he was executed, they were writing asking for him and where would he be. They were writing the army. And that letter came in a box with his things. That was their notice. There wasn't any internet back in 1917. And he was a country boy. They were tobacco farmers. So there wasn't a lot of interaction, and the news was a bit slow. My phone is going off. It's my son calling me. Daddy. The news was a bit slow at that time. But what I can tell you is, putting everything in perspective, we embrace the project. We look forward to seeing something wonderful and something grand that touches the souls of not just the native Houstonians, but something that becomes, dare I say, a point of interest where people will come to Houston and visit the park and acknowledge the sacrifices that the soldiers made. It's because of these soldiers, the men of the 24th, that the Code of Military Justice was changed, that cemeteries were integrated, and a host of other things that have benefited soldiers today. In closing, the Army or the military was integrated by order of President Truman in 1948. What does that mean? That means that opportunity was opened to everyone. And here we are in 2024 discussing something that probably in 1917 could not have been conceived of. That as a family, we are coming together to do something that acknowledges the sacrifices and unburdens the souls of those who have departed. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak to you all. I really appreciate it, and I love you. Thank you.
A heartfelt thanks for your words and for sharing that. What you remind me of is that in 1924, or since 1924, with the founding of the park, there was no memorial built in this park. The park existed, but there is not a place of memorial, and it was that essential missing piece that inspired us to create this project. So we're about this business for the very first time in Houston's history and in the park's history, that we're going to finally make good on what the original concept was, to create a memorial to the soldiers. The fact that we're in 2024 and we have the exoneration, we have many more people at the table to make these decisions, to do it appropriately and sensitively, is a thrilling opportunity to get something right about the telling of this history. So thank you for your involvement. We really appreciate it very, very much. Next slide, please. Turning, I feel so banal saying anything after your words. I'm sorry, it's hard to get back into, that was so beautiful and moving. So it's important business to find where this goes and how this happens and how it's responsive to what it needs to do. What you're seeing here is West Memorial Drive moving through these different ecosystems as identified by Berg Oliver. Showing you again a sort of attention to studying this fragment of the park. Next. Here are more recent mappings where we've surveyed all of the large existing trees because, again, like the other projects, we're fitting into this site. You can see in the upper portions how much is grass. I'll also say 12 years ago, it was a lot more open than what it is now. There's some regeneration. A lot of the ground plane, we've been working with Blackland Collective, regional ecosystem services consultants. And a lot of the thickety ground plane is invasive plants, so we want to manage that while preserving and protecting the larger trees. We're also not thinking about the trees as an individual object, but the ecosystem that they share. So these larger blue areas are groupings of significant clusters of plants, of understory, mid-canopy, and high canopy trees, all of which will be preserved. So this grassy area at the top, much more open at the northern end of this than the southern end. So that's where we're really thinking we would focus more on the new trees that would be planted in. So eventually the whole thing would be covered with trees, but strategically locating the new trees in any of the clearings that exist while protecting these bigger connected clusters. Next. This is about sound. We want to create a place of contemplation and sanctity. We're between the railroad and the highway and Memorial Drive. So we're thinking about how can we mitigate sound. One of the strongest ways is actually using earth, building up earth. So we're looking at ways we would like to not build walls. You know, sound walls are all over the place and they're kind of awful looking. So trying to figure out ways to create a sense of immersion and scale. Next. The area in question, I mean, all of that middle part is golf course. So of course, all of those ruins are gone. And we're in this long area parallel to the railroad. The railroad has an existing broad prairie that is fantastic. So we've been looking at its diversity, protecting all of that prairie. And one idea is to let the outer loop trail thread along that prairie so that if you think about the outer loop trail in the whole park, and the eastern glades, you're in mostly forest. If you go across and we can connect to the southern half, you're in deep forest and the barrancas, so you have topography. And then coming up by Hank and into this part of the park, you would have this beautiful prairie that exists kind of because the power lines are there and it's constantly kept in full sun. But the grass diversity and native flora diversity is fantastic, so we would protect that swath. If anybody's concerned about the proximity of the rail, there's a big ditch that has a thicket of trees in it between the rail and this prairie strip. Next, please. This is the layout of the regiments. Again, we're just gearing up to do this design work, so that's why we're showing you our kind of initial inspirational images. You're seeing mess halls, officers' housing, and the layout of tents. Each one of those black squares was a tent, and I think they each housed 6 adults. The spaces in between were 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th streets. They laid it out really like a city, and so the organization named these as streets. And we've been thinking how cool to keep those open and not have any trees in those so that you would start to feel how big was a regiment. And just this mapping, the only part that isn't nibbled by golf course is this far left one. So is there some way to mark the corners so that you could learn how many regiments were in the park and how big a regiment was? Again, scale. Oh, will you go back, please, Kimberly? You can see just above those horizontal buildings that were stables for the cavalry. You can see that strip of open, sunny prairie, and then you can see the ditch and the line of trees between the rail and that prairie. So that prairie is a pretty rich ecosystem, so we want to protect and preserve that. Next. So the dashed line is the outline of what we have to work with. Again, it's a footprint of about a project boundary of 100 acres. That bite out of that is the golf course. And you can see the dashed lines of the 11th Street and 12th Street give us the size of one full infantry, and that happened to be the 122nd and 124th. You can see the band of mess halls, officers' quarters, and then 10 encampments, showers and latrines, and then stables at the very top. I do not think we're headed toward a recreation of a camp. Like, I don't think that's the right thing to do. I think this needs to be abstract, and this idea of using trees to represent soldiers and density and that sort of thing feels like a kind of memorial park solution, that you use plants to talk about something alive to communicate the power of something that has died. I think that's a very strong and poetic idea still. The selection of the species, the layout of the species, and where they go is what's up next. But we were thinking maybe this has the structure so you could at least feel the bones of the roads of the old camp. These are some other images. We were thinking maybe to engage kids and help people visualize it. Maybe there's some frames or something that you could go and visit and feel like you understood, again, the scale of the camp itself. What would a day in the life of a soldier be? We think this has to have parts that are solemn and reflective, of course, to capture the gravity of this situation. But it doesn't have to all be that. We're imagining like children's play, activity, like what if you had a boot camp route that you could run through the groves and actually pull up bars and those kinds of things and make it a kind of boot camp like the soldiers. You know, anything that puts you in a position of empathy with the people who trained here. I think that's an interesting, or it could be an exciting thing to explore in the design ahead. Next. This is just more images showing you what the camp was like. Next. You can tell we got excited. We got a new batch of historic images, so I'm showing too many of them because anything new on this project I get excited about. This is showing you, like, if we filled the empty spaces with trees, about what that would look like. These are the big significant clusters I was talking about preserving. All of the other dots are trees we've surveyed. They have a number, they have a name, we know what they are, and we're evaluating their health. So this is really a kind of infill project to get to the scale of the memorial. Next. Oh, this is sorry, I talked about this too early. This is the strip of existing prairie and fantastic biodiversity in that band. Next. We're proposing that we add another layer of prairie, again, for maintenance and management, but also increased biodiversity to keep where the showers and lavatories were, that maybe that builds on the existing prairie and we get more of it. And then maybe we keep these vistas to the prairie open. I mean, these are just essential bones. We'd love to hear if you say, don't do that, but we think at the highest level, this gives us a sense of order, and it's something authentic. You can walk along 13th Street and say, I'm walking exactly where these soldiers walked. I'm standing where they lived. I know where the mess hall is. And I think we can evoke that without building a model camp. Next. This is the modesty of the fragments we're finding. This is, quick, poured in place, concrete footings, foundations, and bricks from the Houston Brick Company. Next. To wrap up other high-level thoughts as we start, working with the Conservancy and things that they're hearing on the ground is a need for more parking. We're setting as a benchmark to increase access at the north and south, but preserving the sanctity of the middle there. So adding right at the base of the living bridge, adding parking, which serves as overflow for the running trail center, for the timing track and the cafe. It's an easy walk over that bridge. So you could get a south set of parking, and then to service the, well, there isn't really parking at this northern edge, so that would be another area, right along the highway It's a very underutilized, fairly open in that little strip that's caught between Memorial Drive and the highway. So we want to keep parking out of the heart of the memorial as much as possible by moving it to the two ends, but while meeting the needs for public access to the park. Next. Some of the diverse activities, elements, and experiences that we've been researching to propose to you today. I'll run through these. There's one slide each. Next. Remembrance and ceremony is what I've been mostly talking about. Some of these are other examples of memorial landscapes. This one in the upper right is in Europe. It's in Germany, using this fragment of forest and newly planted forest as a memorial. Next. Fitness and recreation, what I was mentioning about a kind of boot camp or kids play, but not just a swing set, but actually stuff you climb or build or make that starts to evoke the idea of both nature and being in this site, but also something related to the camp. Next. Exploration and immersion, this is probably my personal favorite. This is our project at Rothko Chapel. If anybody's been there to see it, you can see Memorial Park. This idea of bringing people into communion with nature in a safe way where they're actually learning something about the ecosystem. That's how we build the next generation of stewards who 100 years from now will be coming to this kind of meeting to make sure that we're protecting our public parks. Next, get them while they're young. Interpretation and education. This is the bird blind at Memorial Park. This is a construction we did for the Machicomico Native peoples in Virginia. Ways to embed a site very subtly and elegantly with the stories of place. Another, more using art for interpretation and education, ways to, again, have an abstract representation of something that allows people to see it without a sort of Williamsburg recreation of something, but rather an abstraction of something. Next. And then the last slide is parking. We understand that this will be an attraction. It in itself is big, so particularly I expect have elderly visitors, people who might remember or be related to soldiers from World War I, and so having parking access at the head of the memorial. Next, and that concludes the presentation. So those are some of the ideas so far, some of the ideas about bones, about layout, and Chris, do you want to open up the questions?
Let's give Thomas and Jason another round of applause. So as I mentioned earlier, we've been collecting questions online, which we've kind of organized those here. We got a lot of similar questions, so we've organized those. But if you have a question tonight, remember we need you to either raise your hand or take those to the back. We have staff that can bring those up to me. So we're going to work through these. Some of these, hopefully, Thomas answered in his presentation, but as an exercise, we're going to work through them because that's we believe that we owe that to you. Okay, so Thomas and I are going to go back and forth here. So here's a question. How many acres of trees and numbers of trees will come down?
Well, the point of surveying all the existing large healthy trees was to protect them and not take them down. So I see this project as mostly interplanting. If this idea of adding the regimental trees sticks as we move forward, I think there's a lot of open space there. There are a lot of unhealthy trees, but all the healthy trees we of course want to preserve, and I think it's important for people to see them as already inside of an ecosystem, that they're in those groupings that we talked about protecting.
Yeah, so similarly, how many moths will survive? And I think the response is the same, that we've surveyed those, and it is our intent to weave the project into those and understand those are high value groupings of trees. All right, so we'll talk about parking. How many parking lots will there be? So I'll take this one. There will be, at current concept design, there's 2 parking lots. One would be to the south of the plan, which would be closer to Memorial Drive, and another one at the north end of the project area, closer to kind of where the loop begins to make that turn and the roundabout is now. A follow-up question about the number of how much more parking. So if we look at the West Loop Road from Memorial to about that roundabout, there's about 265 spaces there along the road. And the Conservancy is committed to, we've put out a 40% goal of increase off of that 265 number. And so that's what our goal is. We feel very comfortable that we'll be able to meet that goal. And then I know the next question is going to be about, is it paid or is it free? And I am so happy to be able to answer that one tonight, that we are committed to making any new parking free. Thank you, Dexter, yeah. For that project, yes. So any new spaces related to the Morro Groves project will be free parking, and this keeps in line with the Conservancy's intent that about half the parking in the park remains free, and we're going to make sure that half or more than half remains free. So, all right, Thomas, have we considered downsizing the project and relocating to an existing open space within the park?
Well, one, there is no giant open, I mean, unless you're giving me the golf course, Chris, I'll take the golf course for a memorial landscape, but I don't think the fans of the golf course would like that at all. There isn't really a big open space, but I think the better response is this is where we've actually found pieces of Camp Logan, and enough of them that it really holds together as an authentic site for a memorial experience. Now, back to the idea, you could make a giant statue of a soldier and say, that's our memorial, and that captures everybody. But as we've heard, the stories are too complex and diverse, and there are beautiful stories, and there are painful stories, and there are injustices and justices, all happening at once. And so I think this place, we have not looked at moving it because we found so many reasons to anchor it to this place. I would say from the original master plan that the tree survey has in some ways reduced its size because we didn't know what we were dealing with. We didn't have a tree survey of the entire 1,600 acres when we started the master plan. We still don't, but we do of that area now. So we know more. And so it's reduced in scale accordingly. I would say it was also much more open. I mentioned that earlier. It was a whole lot more open 12 years ago. And now it's thick, but it's not thick with great stuff we're finding.
Okay, we received this one. Will this project also include a walkway across I-10 next to the rail bridge to be able to provide a much-needed access for pedestrians, bikes, to get across I-10 from the Heights, Timber Grove area without the risk associated with crossing those busy roadways?
Would you like another land bridge?
Well, yes, that would be amazing. So not as part of Memorial Groves, but as contemplated in the master plan and then in the 10-year plan, that concept it's in there. Certainly, everyone in this room can understand will be a complex project. But what I can tell you is that the Conservancy, the city, the county are working together, TxDOT, to conceptualize and figure out a way to do that. We know that was something we talked about. And the timing is right with the potential I-10 being redone. And so know that all of those partners are in collaboration to try to see if we can get that done. All right, Thomas. We'll stay on the topic of trees here. With so much canopy loss from the Derecho, Beryl, those are our recent storms here, the drought, urban sprawl, why another project that removes canopy? I know you've answered it, but
Yeah.
give it to us again.
I'll give it to you again. I mean, this is a project about planting a few thousand more trees. So the big grass area that you're currently maintaining with the lawnmower would become forest. So the idea is this is a memorial forest. So.
Okay, one about the prairie, which you've already hit on, but will the prairie that runs next to the railroad, what will happen to it? I thought the memorial was originally going to be 50 acres and exist in what is now forested next to the running path. Did that change? Let me repeat that one more time. Will this destroy the valuable prairie that runs next to the railroad?
No.
No. I thought the memorial was originally going to be 50 acres and exist in what is now forested next to the running path. I'm thinking that's the SLT. I'm
No,
not sure.
it's where we had it in the master plan.
Okay.
It's exactly the same that was approved by city council. We haven't moved it, but we're not only preserving the prairie in question, but actually augmenting and adding to it.
Okay. All right. This is the last trees one I have in my hand, unless we get more. Are pine trees the species to plant, considering how many of them toppled during the storms and their vulnerability to drought and infestation?
That is very much front of mind right now, and that's why we've engaged Blackland to help advise us. They're a regional conservation organization. It's Blackland Collective. And we are looking at what would be the most resilient species. I think even if we use different species, they should grow similarly. Like if it's multiple oaks, they should have a similar kind of trunk character so that we get this sense of repetition. It doesn't have to always be the same species. As far as pines go, we're seeing a real diversity of what has survived drought. And in this area, there is a massive, I think it's shortleaf pine that's absolutely spectacular, and it has resisted for what must be over a century of time. So I think there's a real diversity of what will thrive here. Obviously, we want a species that's going to do very, very well. Nothing worse than a memorial that, whenever people are like, oh, we want to start a thing and name a tree after everybody's grandmother, I'm like, don't do that. Don't assign a person to a tree, because that's too unreliable.
Great. Will there be any areas for families or kids? And I think you hit on it, but yes, the answer is yes. And we know, again, that 100-acre site provides us the opportunity to do a couple of different objectives. And as it's currently conceptualized, on the northern half is where some more of the quiet and contemplative elements might exist. But we're committed to, again, this is a park, and we're committed to picnic areas, areas for kids to run around and play, restrooms, those things that you would typically want and desire when you come to Memorial Park will be a part of it.
In the master plan, Chris, you'll remember the northern part is where we put play as far as it relates to fields, volleyball, baseball, all that. In the master plan at the head of Picnic Loop, we have proposed a very large-scale playground that would be more for kids' play, but kids of varying ages that aren't necessarily in an organized sport on a field, but want to just play. That one we had thought, because it's kind of the gateway to the whole southern part of the park, that would really inspire kids with nature, like playing with natural materials and trees, stuff made out of trees. We would love to not see brightly colored plastic play equipment at Memorial Park, but meaningful things. We've tried to bring so much meaning, we don't want to stop now. And so I can imagine that one being around nature play, but I'd love to imagine play for kids that is building on these themes of the camp and the war preparation and the tents and the day in the life of the soldier, or things that I'm sure we can have something that's meaningful that pulls on these themes so that everything within the memorial groves is kind of contributing to the story that it can tell.
How can we avoid the sound of trains disrupting the solemn nature of the memorial?
That is a very difficult thing to overcome. So in selecting the site, again, I'm anchoring on the fact that we have archaeological ruins here as a very important factor. That's a positive. A negative is the sound of train. However, that very rail line is how the soldiers were brought to Camp Logan, and it's how they were taken to war. So the proximity to the rail line, if you think about it that way, actually becomes a really powerful reminder of the connectivity that so many soldiers were coming from Illinois and all over the United States coming into Houston via that very rail line. So it has a role in the memorial. The fact that it's loud is a bummer, but I think the truth of it is maybe more significant than the negative of the sound. If you're doing it as a sum total, I think we still tip the balance toward having it close to the rail.
Will this project honor all of World War I and those who served, or just the regiments that trained and worked in Houston?
That's an excellent question. I think our goal is that it honor not just soldiers, but actually all the people who, I mean, think about the farmers growing vegetables and getting that food to the camp and cooking the food, building the camp, deconstructing the camp, maintaining the camp. Much of the city of Houston was involved in this massive enterprise. So I think having a way to communicate the scale of this commitment, and not just the soldiers who trained here, but the collective story of this city and its role in World War I, as well as all of the soldiers who were participating in that.
How will you enhance the ability to enter-exit the park by bus, bike, or foot, bus stops, shelters, sidewalks, crosswalks, etc.? I think that's how you get in and out of the park, the pathways to the park, connections from all the different directions, how people move, use the park is something that we continually study and try to understand. The West Loop parking the parking on the West Loop is a good example of this. It's in right square in the project area. There's cars, there's people getting on the SLT. We know we're going to build memorial groves. What do we do about it? And we don't have all the answers figured out yet, but this topic of how people move in and out and among Memorial Park is one that we continue to study and will be part of it. I think part of this question is getting at to the potential access points across I-10, for example. And so, again, with the city and partners, we're continuing to research those. I know we have some of our other friends of park organizations in here that have different connections. So we continue to study those and we'll research them and hopefully implement them. So what will happen to the current bike trails in that area? I think it's just outer loop that cuts through the Memorial Grove site, and that outer loop will still exist in some form or fashion. It may not be in the exact place, but we know that outer loop is you can multimodal, you can ride, run on it, and that connection, again, not only from different connections in the city, but the overall connections inside the park. Thomas mentioned Southern Arc, outer loop. This is where the artists get to do their thing and really shine in all of these unique connections, and there's thought and meaning behind all of them. So outer loop will be a part of the project area, and bikes will still be allowed on that. Would you consider continuing the tree planting into the parking lots?
As you've seen in all the parking lots we've built so far, we pepper them with large trees that will eventually, hopefully, start to connect, and we can have some shaded parking in Houston. So yes, I think interspersing parking spots with trees has become a signature of the Memorial Park parking areas. Nothing sadder than a giant sea of asphalt, which is more the standard here, and we want to see those shaded because, and I'll add, not only have you seen shade coming into the parking lots, but you're also seeing visible stormwater management. At the Eastern Glades, you're seeing the large arcs that are full of native plants and tons of flowers, echinacea, and lots of butterfly attracting plants, pollinator plants, are using that drainage water as again, bringing more and more biodiversity. So it's not just the shade of the parking lot, it's also the plantings around it and the way we manage the stormwater. Oh, I should mention, one of the other things in surveying, getting to know this area over the last few weeks, one of the things that was done to build the camp was actually lines of ditches. And so every now and then you find these straight lines in the woods that are kind of interesting as another one of those traces of the work that was done here.
Yeah, so I'll read it just to, how many trees will come down just for parking? I think Thomas just answered that. It's in our intent to, that's why the tree survey exists, right? That we want to intersperse the parking as carefully and thoughtfully as possible. And again, will be interspersed with more plantings. The pristine prairie must be handled with care. What is the plan to make sure that happens? I'll go.
Yep.
I'll try. Again, Thomas mentioned it, and I alluded to it at the beginning. I mean, Thomas and his team care, and not only do they care, but then we build the rest of the design team with folks with the expertise and the knowledge, and then we hire contractors who have worked in Memorial Park and understand our standards, and we ensure that they carry out the work in a way that keeps the prairie intact. And we put a lot of thought, time, and energy into selecting our partners. And again, as part of the project design, it's going to remain essentially untouched. We know that it's remnant prairie. It's extremely valuable, and our goal is to add to it. So I really think we're going to be okay on this one. More than okay. Okay. Will the railroad be visible from areas on the west side? If the existing natural forest is taken away, will dirt mounds mute the sound of the trains? So will the railroad be visible from the project area?
The rail itself probably you wouldn't be able to see the rail itself, but if trains are on it, you would see the trains, because those they're almost as tall as this room, so
Right.
you would see trails, I imagine.
And then-
Trains, sorry.
Good.
You'll see trails too. But.
Yeah, and the second half was this about will there be aspects of the landscape to mute the sound of the trains? And
Well, I think we've got to really task ourselves with coming up with a creative way that for some still place to be as quiet as possible. And we've been asked for, at least the 25 years of my career, I've been asked to plant plants to stop sound, and it just doesn't really work. They're not mean enough. They're not tough enough to bounce all those sound waves back. Walls, earth, something angled that deflects sound works. So that's not a bad idea. I think we have to explore creative alternatives to that. We also can't go down in Houston because you hit water real fast. So I know when we were looking at the land bridge and prairie, we were wondering if we could take the roads down and then back up. But you see on I-10 where it floods every rainstorm, like that's just not a good idea. So.
okay, just two more, and we got 5 minutes, so this is going to work out. Will the roads leading here have bike lanes, unlike the rest of the park? And I think the answer is there are no new roads contemplated as part of this project area. Again, I would put that under the umbrella of how you get to and how you exist in Memorial Park is something that is contemplated in the master plan, the 10-year plan, and that we will, as things continue to change and evolve, so will we. And we'll listen. Again, this is what this is for. We want it. I mean, it's a park for y'all. It's a park for people. And it's our role in the Conservancy to steward that. And so open to continuing that conversation. And then I'm going to end with, I don't know this story. I think you just mentioned, Thomas, you learn stuff every day. I may look to some of the folks in the crowd here to answer this one. Are you honoring the pet black bear? The Heritage Society has this story and a picture. Do any of our historians in the, okay.
Never heard this one.
Okay. Sure. I'm looking at my director of park operations back here, and the idea of me
Black
saying
bear,
that we're going to have
here
a
we
black
come.
bear, she's squirming. So, but no, we will definitely look into that story. Some of Thomas's team here, historians,
That's
and
great.
that's
I'd
a
also
great
like to
story.
get any film that was connected to that exhibition. That would be really terrific. Thank
Okay,
you. Thank you
great.
for that. I also want to mention, in closing, we will take not only your questions, but also feedback. And we are, we're really, our team, Jeff Ayton and Nathan Roth and Kimberly Huggins. Kimberly, Kimberly's been running the slides. Jeff, will you wave so everybody knows you? And Nathan. We are kicking off this week, so we will be coming back probably early February for a meeting to come back with some design concepts to run past you. So please come again. It's great to have people who attend all the meetings and can help us through the whole process. Every time new people show up, we start with the very first questions again, and that can make it really hard. So you've gotten a background in process, history, and our site analysis to date, and some of the ideas of parking at the two ends and somehow acknowledging the layout of the camp. So that's where we are, and we'll come back with a lot more stuff in February. So I hope you'll please stay tuned.
Yes, thank you.